Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Petrick, Vice President of Research at Vistage Worldwide, and I am happy to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series. This series is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community, experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices, helping you navigate new challenges and opportunities. With regular market fluctuations, government actions that are designed to impact inflation, and businesses looking to hang on through the post-COVID recovery, CEOs have been making decisions in a period of accelerated disruption and extreme volatility. During times of economic downturn, as uncertainty rises, so do lawsuits. Individuals, creditors, and other organizations turn to the legal system in an effort to reduce the impacts of the greater economic cycle. That is why it is critical for business owners to take appropriate action to protect the value of your personal and professional assets. And that is why we have invited Presser Law Firm to share some insights to help you take action and develop your toolkit and put yourself in the best position to handle any threats that might come from the economic cycle ahead. Joining us today is Hillel Presser, founder and managing partner of the Presser Law Firm, who is a Vistage member and speaker. He represents individuals and businesses in connection with the establishment of comprehensive asset protection plans that incorporate both domestic and international components. He's been featured in media and the press internationally, including Forbes, Sports Illustrated, and The Robb Report, along with various network television stations. Hillel has represented some of today's most well-known business owners, doctors, celebrities, and professional athletes, and is also available to come to your Vistage groups. Hillel, welcome, and let's turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Really timely matter today, especially with the Fed hiking rates about 3/4 of a point the other day. So very, very timely. Probably the first question I always get asked is why I became an asset protection attorney. And as far back as I can remember, if you would have asked me when I was 10 years old what I was going to be, I would have probably told you hands down I was going to be a lawyer. And it probably had something to do with, at that time, I was very close with my Uncle Jimmy. And Uncle Jimmy was one of the first personal injury attorneys to ever advertise on TV. Now, while I knew him as Uncle Jimmy, the rest of the world knew him as Jim the Hammer Shapiro. And he would get on TV and he'd scream at the top of his lungs, "I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. I'll wring out every penny, squeeze out every dime. You don't have to like me, just make sure you call me. I may be an SOB, but I'm your SOB." And I'm going to take about a half a minute and show you one of Jim's many ads.
Hurt? I cannot rip out the hearts of those who hurt you. I cannot hand you their severed heads. But I can hunt them down and settle the score. I'll squeeze them for every dime I can. Every single dime. I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro. But I cannot proceed until you call. 1-800-546-7777. You call, I hammer.
Now, because we have time constraints, I won't show you my favorite ad where his face actually pops out of the zero of the 1-800 number, but I think you get the point. Now, I don't show you these ads because I'm proud of Uncle Jimmy. I show you these ads because this was 30, 40 years ago in upstate New York. Today, this is the norm. Every bus bench, who can I sue? Every radio ad, who can I sue? Every TV ad, who can I sue? How do you take the money out of the hardworking business owners like yourself and redistribute the wealth? So there's thousands of lawyers out there in almost every single city trying to find a way to take your money. I thought it'd be pretty neat to be one of only a few attorneys in the entire country that teach you how to protect it. So I laugh, but I say I am the lawyer that hates lawyers. So why do you even need asset protection? I show this cute little cartoon. It's two lawyers talking. One says, "I say sue." The other one says, "anyone in particular." Now, I always get some smiles here, but this is realistic, guys. Just like all of us as Vistage members, and I've been a Vistage member for a very long time, we get together once a month to help each other. Well, the lawyers are getting together and they're figuring out who's our next target. There's 100 million lawsuits every single year, and that number is only growing. Lawsuits have literally become the next biggest business. there's a 1 in 4 chance you will be sued, you or your business, in the next 12 months. And the average person and business is sued about 5 times over their lifetime. There's a 50% chance of divorce. I joke when I give this speech from South Florida, where I am today, I say there's a 99.9% chance of divorce. And a lawsuit can cost you tons of money, even if you win the case, because it takes so much money to defend yourself. So I tell all my Vistage members, the trick is not making money, it's keeping it. And again, I've been a Vistage member for a long time, so I get it. It's about growth, growth, growth. But here's the challenge. For every 60 minutes you spend making money, stop and spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. Now, you're going to find some of this information really interesting. So right now, we're at what I'd call the calm before the storm. And if you look back to the previous recession, 30% of businesses that do over about $1 million plus or minus were faced with a lawsuit during that previous recession. 45% of businesses that are worth or do over more than $1 million a year on an annual basis, they either spent or earmarked $1 million a year for lawsuits to defend themselves. Now, this $1 million a year doesn't even take into consideration, any judgments or settlements. So let's talk recession, right? Are we in a recession? Is the recession coming? We go back and forth every single day, and a really, really interesting time to talk about this. Lawsuit filings and court actions lag the overall economic picture. Entering and exiting a recession cycle are the peak times for lawsuits to occur. When the greater economic picture is weak, more lawsuits begin to get filed. And the key areas of growth for lawsuits during a recession include employee retention, relations, compliance, creditor claims, failure to perform, contract claims, and so many other things. And if you think about it in layman's term, this makes sense, right? So when we have a recession, okay, the stock market goes down, inflation goes up, interest rates are up, people are making less money. Well, they need to substitute that income. How do we substitute the income? File a lawsuit. It's free. There's a lawyer on almost any block that will take the case for free on a contingency fee basis. And then if the defendant doesn't settle the case, they have to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars defending themselves, even if they win. So every time you see the economy go down, lawsuits always go up. Now, let's talk about inflation. It's really interesting, especially when it comes to directors and officers' liability. So supply chain issues, labor supply constraints, and economic inflation, they tend to lead to higher director and officer liability claims. And if you think about it, underlying issues of financial performance lead to exposure of assets for corporate leadership. And this is because risks are being sued people by employees, by vendors, by competitors, by investors, customers, or other parties, and they're being sued for either actual or alleged wrongful acts in managing the company. Also, a lot of the security claims have increased since quarter number 4 of last year due to unanticipated or even undisclosed economic misses on the company financial releases. So obviously, recessions, height rates, inflation, they cause the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen to the company. Our numbers might be off. So a lot of the SEC liability claims for essentially misrepresented or incomplete or inaccurate public facts have grown again, more or less so since the end of last year. And again, it was due to anticipated, increased costs, decreased margins, all the things that we've seen happen with supply chain issues, cost of goods going up, things taking longer, and things of that nature. Also, you always have to check your insurance policy. People have insurance, it's cheap, it helps you sleep at night, I get it, but nobody reads the policy. I had a $10 million policy on one of my properties. Somebody got sick for mold. I checked my policy and there was a mold exclusion of $5,000. So yeah, insurance sounds great, but when you look at the stats, only about 30% of lawsuits are actually covered by insurance. And D&O insurance policies essentially exclude prior acts to coverage, and they also exclude claims against the insured or internal properties. parties, excuse me. And insolvency, injury on property, damage, specific inclusions are often a part of these policies. So you have to be very, very careful with the insurance policies. Policies for D&O insurance exclude internal claims, claims made for actions prior to the coverage, of course, and even when specifically noted, and exclusions and things of that nature. It brings us to volatility, right? The stock market's going up and down, real estate went up, now it's starting to come down a little bit. And it's very interesting what it brings, because I don't even know if you think about the connection, but volatility actually brings patent filings, claims, and risks. And let me explain. During times of market volatility, patent filing investments actually increase by about 50% or more. And the volatility of stock prices leads to these firms and businesses finding opportunities for easy money. So they're actually looking for, where is there not a patent where we can have one, and go after a company. So this obviously causes patent defense claims to increase. They go up by about 75% because they're then attacked, their business operations, by the new people who now filed for these patents. So it's crazy, because you have this market volatility and you have actually these patent seekers out there trying to find what is something we can file a patent on that either doesn't exist or isn't doesn't fully covered, file the patent, and then sue the current companies that are using this type of structure, for violating the patent use. Now you see it the other way too, which is very, very interesting. You see companies essentially focus on increasing patent portfolios as a means to secure revenue and stabilizing their valuation on public and private market trading, because their businesses went down. So now this is like an intellectual property that can increase the value of their business. And the divestment of patents or intellectual property from operating companies as a means of revenue stabilization can also lead to litigation and liability. So you have people actually selling their patents to bring in money to the business, because the business is not bringing in enough money. So really, really interesting. You would never even connect the dots that a potential or actual recession, inflation, and market volatility, would lead to things like increased patent litigation. But, overall, long story short, when we see a recession, when we see inflation, when we see higher interest rates, when we see market volatility, the short answer is we see much, much, much more lawsuits. So we need to figure out, what do we do to protect yourself? So I don't want to just give the problems. Let's talk about the answers. So how will a well-structured asset protection plan help you? Number one, you want to discourage lawsuits. You want to sell your plan. I can't tell you how many times someone will threaten to sue one of my clients. I will literally go to the back of the office, get the file, and send it to the other attorney. I'll tell them everything my clients have, just the fact that they can't get it. Half the time, they don't want to sue my clients. If they do want to sue my clients, you want to use the fact that you've protected yourself proactively to negotiate inexpensive settlements. I had a client that was getting sued for about $20 million. Because he was uncollectible and judgment proof, we were able to settle that lawsuit for about $250,000. I had another client who actually lost a lawsuit, had a judgment against him for about $5 million, and we were able to settle that judgment for about $500,000. You, of course, want to protect your assets from judgments, reduce your insurance costs. If you have a good asset protection plan, a lot of times you don't need to spend as much money on insurance. Keep your wealth safe from other financial threats and help you achieve your other financial objectives. One key takeaway here is just make sure your team is talking. We're talking asset protection planning today. How do you take your chips off the table? How do you become uncollectible? How do you become judgment proof? How do you make it so you don't have to start over for everything that you worked hard for? But there's a lot of other areas that go closely in hand, like estate planning, tax planning, business succession planning. So you always want to make sure just that you're looking at one fully integrated set of facts. 8 keys to a good asset protection plan. Number one, protect every asset. I had a client who came to me, they had a lease, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, my lease, that's a liability. They had a long-term lease at a very high-end mall. They were paying about $10,000 a month. Current market value was $25,000 a month. The creditor took their lease and sold it at auction for about $500,000. So here they thought their lease was a liability, but really it was an asset. So people have so much more than they think they do. People think about the real estate, people think about their business, people think about money, but what about if somebody owes you money? What about intellectual property like patents and trademarks? What about inheritances? What about phone numbers and domains? Of course, you always want to keep your plan 100% legal and 100% ethical. You want to keep your plan very simple and cost effective. Don't try and do it all at once. Crawl before you walk, walk before you run. If your biggest asset is your brokerage account, protect it, wait a few months. If your next biggest asset is your real estate portfolio, protect it, wait a few months. If your next biggest asset is your business, protect it. You don't need to do everything at once. We've talked about making sure it fits your other financial goals. So make sure your whole financial team is talking asset protection, estate planning, tax planning, business succession planning. A good asset protection plan, you have to allow you to retain control. And something you'll hear me say over and over is own nothing, control everything. Own nothing, control everything. I'm going to come back to that in detail. I want to talk a little bit more about that a few slides from now. You, of course, want to keep your plan up to date. You get an annual physical every year. You should have a financial physical every year. And you have to be comfortable with your plan. The whole point of an asset protection plan is so you can sleep at night. There's domestic asset protection planning. There's international asset protection planning. You need to do what's comfortable for you. And it's got to be totally effective against any threat. So, again, it doesn't matter if the neighbor next door is suing you. It doesn't matter if it's the most powerful attorney downtown. Your asset protection plan should stand the test of time. And every asset should be protected, whether it's the real estate, the business, the boat, the car, etc. So 3 maxims to asset protection. Number 1, protect yourself before you have a problem. You always want to be proactive. You don't buy the car insurance after the accident. You don't buy the health insurance after you get sick. You don't buy the life insurance after the death. The further in advance you can do asset protection planning, the better it will be and the better it'll stand up. Start with the basic plan and add firewalls as needed. And most importantly, don't look for one magic bullet. Asset protection should never be done on a cookie cutter basis. Everybody's assets are different and everybody's potential threats and creditors and liabilities are different. So what works for you may not work for me and vice versa. You want to have an individualized and customized and tailored plan for your assets. And again, someone might be protecting against a teenage driver, others against a third marriage. Biggest mistakes to avoid, and there's a lot of them. Number 1, hiding your assets. Asset protection is not about hiding. It's not about secrecy. It's about protection. You should be able to tell everybody what you have and where it is. They just should not be able to get to it. Number 2, titling your assets to straws. I had a guy come into my office. I can't make up these stories. He said, "Mr. Presser, I'm being sued, but don't worry, I gave everything to my best friend." I looked at him and I said, "What actually makes you think your best friend has less legal and financial troubles than you?" I can't make up the story. The client was being sued. He gave everything to his best friend. His best friend got a divorce, and his best friend's then ex-wife took his assets. You don't want to go titling all your assets to your spouse. We see this a lot with doctor clients. "Oh, my husband or wife, they're the less vulnerable." No, nobody gets up in the morning, expects to be sued. Nobody's immune from a lawsuit. The husband or wife can just as easily get in a car accident taking the kids to soccer practice. You can mess things up for estate planning or tax planning. So you don't want to just go shove everything into your spouse's name. You never want to commit any fraudulent transfers. That deals with trying to protect yourself after the fact. And of course, you never want to break any laws. Keep it legal, keep it ethical. Okay, hopefully by now we've laid a little bit of a foundation of what asset protection is, why it's so important, why liability insurance is great, but why it might not be enough, why lawsuits go up in a recession or an inflationary environment, or a volatility environment. Now I want to talk about how do you actually protect things. And this is my favorite slide. And let me just show you the middle. in the middle, you have something called exposed wealth. And I just want you to think about it. Exposed wealth is any asset that's in your name. So if you have liquid assets, checking, savings, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, brokerage accounts in your name, they're exposed and you can lose them. If you have real estate in your name, it's exposed and you can lose it. If you have ownership interest in a company, maybe shares in an S or C corporation, membership interest in an LLC, it's exposed and you can lose it. So if you remember back what I said earlier, I said, own nothing, control everything. Own nothing, control everything. And I said that because if you own it, whether it's the liquid assets, the real estate, or the business, you can lose it. So I don't want to own anything. And I guess you guys could take a pretty good guess if you asked me, what do I own in my name? And the answer is absolutely nothing. I worked way too hard. I don't want to have to do this again. And if I've done my job correctly today, when you leave here, hopefully you won't want to own things either. So, there's three really great things you could do. I mean, there's dozens, but three that we picked for today. Number one is transfer your assets to a protective entity. Number two is protect with liens. And number three, convert into exempt assets. So transferring assets to a protective entity are when you take assets out of your name and you put them into an entity. That way you don't own them anymore, so you can't lose them. Protecting with liens is making something valueless. It's putting liens or mortgages or encumbrances on your property. So if someone sues you, there's no value there. And converting assets into exempt assets is taking assets that are unprotected and turning them into assets that may be protected by your state law. And let's talk about all three of these. Number one, transfer to a protective entity. This is my favorite by far. If you own, if you're going to buy a vacation home or a rental investment property, if you buy that vacation home or that rental property in your name, well, if you get sued, you can lose it. Second, if you buy that rental home or vacation property in your name and somebody gets injured on the property, they can sue you. If you instead take a protective entity, let's just use one as an example, an LLC, and you buy the piece of real estate in the LLC, you don't own it. The LLC owns it. So if you get sued, you can't lose the real estate. And if somebody gets injured, they can't sue you. So think about it. You buy a piece of real estate in your name. If you get sued, you lose it. If somebody gets injured on the property, they sue you. But instead, if you buy the piece of real estate in an LLC, now if you get sued, they can't take the real estate because you don't own it. It's owned by the LLC. And now if somebody gets injured on the property, they can't sue you because you don't own it. They can only sue the LLC. So that's one example of transferring an asset to a protective entity. Now, you can do this with liquid assets. Let's say you have checking, savings, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, brokerage accounts. Well, if you take those liquid assets and if they're in the name of your name or the name of your trust, well, if you get sued, you can lose all your liquid assets. So instead, you can put those liquid assets in a protective entity. And again, there's lots of different types of protective entities. Let's just use one, for example, a limited partnership. And now if you get sued, you don't own the liquid assets. The limited partnership owns the liquid assets. So again, if you put your liquid assets in your name or the name of your trust and you get sued, you can't, you lose everything. If you take the liquid assets and you put them in your limited partnership, your protective entity, if you get sued, nobody can take them because you don't own the liquid assets, the limited partnership does. So those are just two examples, one with real estate, one with liquid assets, of using protective entities to essentially protect your assets, in this case, real estate and liquid assets. And a third one is the ownership interest in your business. So if you own shares in an S Corp, if you own shares in a C Corp, if you own shares in an LLC, well, if someone sues you, they may be able to take the ownership interest in the company. They may be able to get the distributions that you receive in the company because you own the ownership in the company. What you can do is you can create a holding company, and the holding company might be an LLC, it might be a limited partnership, it might be a trust, whatever it may be, everyone's is different, but you can create a holding company to own the shares in the S Corp or the shares in the C Corp or the membership interest in the LLC. So again, if you own the shares in your company, S Corp, C Corp, LLC, if you get sued, you may lose your ownership, you may lose the distributions. But if you instead create a holding company, the holding company can own your shares or your membership interest. And then if you get sued, nobody can go after your business. So again, just 2 or 3 quick examples with real estate, with liquid assets, and with business ownership interests to make sure they're protected, get them out of your name where they're unprotected and exposed, and into a protective entity where no one can touch them. Protecting with liens, this is always interesting. So poverty is power. What's a $1 million house worth if you owe $900,000? What's a $100,000 Mercedes worth if you owe $90,000? There's legal and ethical ways where you can strip value and equity from your assets and make them valueless. So an example, if you have a piece of property that's worth $1 million and you owe $200,000, well, there's $800,000 of equity. Well, with $800,000 of equity, if someone sues you, they can take that equity. One smart, easy thing to do is just simply go to the bank and get a line of credit. Get a line of credit for as much as they'll give you. Maybe it'll be 600 of the 800,000. Well, now the bank records a mortgage for 600,000. It's not costing you anything because you haven't pulled from the line of credit, but the bank has recorded a mortgage of 600,000. So now when someone goes to look you up, they say you have $1 million property. They see you have a first mortgage of 200,000 and a second mortgage of 600,000. Now, if you're worried, you can always pull the money from the line of credit, at which point you'd start paying interest. And then you can protect that money in one of the protective entities that we talked about in our last example. So another really interesting thing you can do is protect with liens. Poverty is power. Make your assets valueless and unattractive to somebody who wants to sue you. A third one to talk about today are exemptions. And let me just explain what exemptions are. Exemptions are assets that are protected by state law. And every state is different. Let me give you an example. In Florida, your house is protected. Your house can be worth 500,000, $1 million, 5 million, 55 million. In Florida, your house is protected. Now, Florida and Texas and Puerto Rico are some of the only states to fully protect your house. California, New York, they might protect parts of your house. They might protect it from, I'm just making it up, 50,000 to 200,000, but not unlimited like Florida or Texas or Puerto Rico. Retirement accounts, annuities, life insurance, they're all things that are protected in Florida. Why do people move to Florida? Why do you see the big CEOs of the company from New York City move here, when they think they're going to be sued? Because they know that Florida is a great place to be a debtor. And I'm joking, but it is. In Florida, you can be worth as much as you want. And as long as all of your assets are in your home, your retirement accounts, your insurance, your annuities, et cetera, all the Florida exemptions, nobody can touch them. Now, again, life insurance is protected in Florida. In Georgia, and I'm going from memory, I think life insurance is only protected up to about $4,000. So you need to see what are the exemptions for your state. And if you go to our website, it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. There's a button that says financial exemptions. And if you click it, we list every single state. So obviously can't go over all of them today, but if you go to our website, wherever you live, check and see what's protected in your state. So 3 really good ways to protect the assets. And if you see me scroll over a slide, it's only because we've already done it, okay? So I want to talk just for a minute about tenancy by entirety. So this is really, really interesting. First of all, let me explain. Tenancy by entirety is only for living married couples. So if a spouse dies, you cannot do it. If there's a divorce, you cannot do it. But it's for living married couples. And it's really, really interesting. Tenancy by entirety exists in about 25 different states. Again, if you go to our website, it's www.assetprotectionattorneys.com. There's a button that says tenancy by entirety, and you can check and see if your state has it, okay? Because it's only in about half the states, plus or minus. But what tenancy by entirety states, it's really interesting. It states the assets of both spouses are not subject to the creditors of one spouse. Let me give you an example. If you're in a state like Florida that has tenancy by entirety, and let's say a husband has an account with $100,000 in it, and a wife has an account with $100,000 in it. Well, if the husband sued, he can lose the $100,000. If the wife is sued, she can lose the $100,000. If the husband and wife would have taken each one of their own $100,000, instead of having them in two separate accounts, putting them in one account, one joint account, and then they label it tenancy by entirety. Now, if the husband gets sued, they can't take one penny. Now, if the wife gets sued, they can't take one penny. The only way they can even potentially take that money is if both the husband and wife are sued at the same time, which rarely ever happens. You know, maybe one gets sued at work, the other gets sued for a car accident. But tenancy by entirety, a whole layer of protection, costs you nothing if you are a married and living couple. I joke, my wife says I only married her to get this extra protection. She may be right, but in any case, really, really good protection. When would you not want to do tenancy by entirety? Maybe you're on a second or a third marriage and you're purposely trying to keep assets apart. Well, you wouldn't want to do tenancy by entirety then, because tenancy by entirety brings assets together. And a lot of people say, well, you know, we gave examples earlier of the LLC and the limited partnership. So when would you use it and when would you not use it? Well, you want to use LLCs for what I call dangerous assets or business activity. And you want to use limited partnerships for what I call safe assets. So essentially, LLCs are used to own businesses. LLCs are owned to own expensive vehicles, boats, planes, golf carts, jet skis. LLCs are used to own real estate. So we like to use LLCs for what I'd call dangerous assets. Limited partnerships you want to use for what I'd call safe assets. So things like liquid assets or things like owning other companies. So again, both are just examples of protective entities, and you can actually layer them together. So this slide shows you how you may have all of your safe assets in a limited partnership. So maybe you have a brokerage account with $1 million, that's titled to your limited partnership. You then may have a piece of real estate owned in an LLC, and you may have a C Corp, and this is just an example. And then it may be that your limited partnership not only owns the $1 million brokerage account, but also owns the ownership interest in the LLC and the C Corp. So now we're layering our protection. And of course, that can also be hooked up to your estate planning and tax planning. So just some key takeaways before we kind of wrap up today. I wanted to make sure that I was sensitive of your time and that we save time at the end for questions. But most important thing to take away from today, number one, take inventory of your assets, okay? Like I said, people have so much more than they think they do. Number two, assess all your business risk, even the personal risks and tolerance in advance of the possible recession. So with rates going up, with inflation up, with market volatility, with a recession, how does that affect you? So for example, maybe you have taken a line of credit against your stocks and bonds. Well, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of percentage. So if the value of the account goes down, you may get a margin call and you may now owe money to put in your brokerage account based on the loan that you took against your stocks and bonds. So you really want to be prepared. You really want to be proactive. You don't want the bank calling you saying, hey, you need to put $500,000 in your account because your value's down. Otherwise, we're selling off your stocks and bonds. And then lastly, start planning early to protect yourself, your business, and your family. So again, I gave kind of this challenge at the beginning, and I'll give it again. The challenge that I give to everybody is for every 60 minutes you spend making money, spend 60 seconds thinking about how to protect it. And again, I've been a Vistage member and speaker for longer than I can remember, not to date myself. Anything I can do to help you guys, I'm happy to do. Happy to have a complimentary preliminary consultation, or as they stated, if you'd like me to come speak to your group, we travel throughout the country doing that. What we're going to do now, I think we're either going to go to Q&A or the poll. I'm going to turn it back over to Vistage and let them quarterback it from here. I'm in no rush, but I wanted to be sensitive of your time. And I guess we did just put a poll up. If you'd like copies of our latest books, just hit yes. We'll send them out to you complimentary. And if not, just hit no. No worries at all. But anything we can do to help you, anything we can do to educate you, Vistage's family.
Excellent. Well, as you're voting, just a few questions, and everyone can continue to submit their questions in the Q&A panel. But I have a couple that I'll serve up first. We did have a question in advance. You mentioned that we had the increase from the Federal Reserve in interest rates. What's your perspective or opinion on how long the government will stop or keep increasing these interest rates to control inflation?
Sure. So as you can see, certainly this year, they've been increasing them a lot, and they've been increasing them quickly. Nobody knows at the end of the day how high it'll go. Nobody knows at the end of the day how low it'll go or how quick. What they're talking about doing, and again, they could, of course, change their mind. Although in fairness, this year they've stuck to what they've been talking about, either stuck to it or have went a little higher. And what they're currently talking about now is by the end of the year, raising it another point. So I don't know if that means the next time they meet, they'll raise it a half a basis point, and then maybe they'll meet it again and do a half or a quarter. But their talks right now are another point by the end of the year. And I'd say, judging on the past history, they'll probably do that, or potentially even a little bit higher. And again, best guess, anybody who tells you they know what they're doing either has no clue or is lying.
Right. Again, the other thing that you talked about is like the hotly contested headline of, are we entering a recessionary cycle? And certainly with the GDP figures that just came out, consecutive quarters of decline is traditionally the definition. However, we're also seeing that we have really strong employment numbers. So unemployment stays really low, jobs continue to be added, and even our CEO confidence index data shows that employment and hiring plans remain strong. But I'm very curious about the increase in legal activity and what you're seeing there. Is there a leading indicator there that around whether we're entering a recessionary cycle?
Yeah, so I've seen, and look, the whole world has probably seen over the last, I'd say 30 to 60 days, things change. So what I mean by things change, right? So interest rates obviously are way up. Obviously, we have the market volatility. Obviously, we have the recession, or close to a recession, depends who you ask, whatever you want to call it. But let's talk about what that's affected, okay? Forget all the things that have already been affected. Supply chain's been affected forever. Blame it on COVID, whatever you want to blame it on. But in the last 30 to 60 days, plus or minus, real estate prices have gone down. So when I say gone down, let me be clear. They went way up during COVID. So when I say they went down, they went down from what I'd call their COVID high. What I've seen is real estate, of course, depending on where you live, what type of real estate, I've seen it go down in the last 30 to 60 days, plus or minus between 5 and 20%, plus or minus. Again, every property is different. You're definitely seeing more inventory. You're definitely seeing less transactions due to the interest rates. You're now seeing people, who would have had 70 people the first day look at their house with 20 overpriced offers. They're now reducing prices. Now, this is not just in real estate. This is with other things as well. If you look at the jewelry or the expensive watch market, okay, watches that were one price 30 to 60 days ago, they're going down. Why are they going down? Well, the crypto has gone down in 2/3. So you had a lot of crypto people buying watches and jewelry and things of that nature. People's accounts are getting called for margins. They now need to sell these quick assets, the Rolex that they bought or whatever it was. So I've seen high-end watches and jewelry, and again, it depends what it is, but I've seen that go down 20-25% in the last 30 to 60 days. So we're seeing a lot of things. Again, those are down from their high numbers. But when it comes to lawsuits, I'm definitely seeing an increase. Every day I speak to probably 5 or 6 different people who call me for one reason or another. Of course, I always love it when they call me proactively and they say I have no lawsuit, but I'm seeing everything you can imagine under the sun. I had a lawsuit earlier this week where insurance wasn't going to cover it. They found a way to weasel their way out. So now, unfortunately, this business owner is faced with a very, high potential lawsuit. But we're seeing a lot more litigation. It's just starting. Again, I'd say that's more over the last 30 days, plus or minus, but it's definitely heating up. And the summer is a time when you see it slow down, actually. And I say that because a lot of times during the summer, people are traveling with their kids, they're traveling with their families, they're not on their day-to-day routines. So it's upticking in a time when normally it's downticking.
Interesting. So another indicator to keep our eye on, not one that was on my radar. You mentioned a line of credit, getting a mortgage, and I wondered, does that apply for a home equity line of credit as well, or is a mortgage important? What's the difference between those two?
They're really the same. So when you get a line of credit, let's say you get a line of credit on your house for $500,000, it's a HELOC or whatever it may be. Well, that means you have access to $500,000. That means you can pull $5,000, you can pull nothing, you can pull $50,000, or you can pull the whole $500,000. Well, if you think about it, it makes sense. Every time you pull, the bank is not going to go put another mortgage on your property. So if I pull $5,000, they're not going to go record a $5,000 mortgage. And then 2 weeks later, I pull $27,000. They're not going to go record a $27,000 mortgage. So the interesting thing with a line of credit or a HELOC is when you get it, and in this case, the example is $500,000, they put a mortgage on your property for the full $500,000. You don't truly owe it because you haven't pulled from it, but they want to do it once the right time so they never have to do it again. So they put that full $500,000 mortgage on your property to protect them. So that way, no matter how little or how much you pull, they're secured for the full amount. Now, when someone suing you goes to look you up, that helps you because it makes your property look much less attractive.
Very interesting. And I would imagine that would apply in a variety of scenarios when somebody's looking at your overall credit portfolio, what that looks like. I hadn't thought of that and hadn't heard of that. So that was a great piece of advice.
Yeah. And think about it. I have lots of business owner clients and they have big lines of credit with the bank. And maybe the bank says, okay, we're going to leverage your accounts receivables and your equipment and machinery or whatever it may be. I have business owner clients that go to the bank and say, listen, I also want you to put a mortgage on my real estate. I also want you to put a mortgage on my boat. Now, again, you better pay that one creditor off because, you're fully secured to them, but it helps you for all the other creditors.
Very interesting. Or I imagine on the other side, if you're trying to get access to capital and you have all these things in place, it might be time. I mean, can you close down those accounts if it seems like you have too much, you're leveraging too much credit?
Of course, again, you don't have to pull it, so you can leave it there and not pull it. Almost like a credit card. You might have had a credit card, maybe you had 6 credit cards, but one credit card, maybe you have a $10,000 limit, and for whatever reason, it sat in the closet for 10 years. It's still there. So you can either close them down or you can just not use them. Either way, you're fine.
Great.
Excellent. And most banks, if you're a good client, won't charge you for that, or they may charge you a couple $100s a year. It's not an expensive thing to do.
Okay. Great advice. You also talked about co-ownership, and I was interested in, are there any things with aging parents? I know a lot of our members are facing their, parents and trying to manage parents' wealth. Is there anything either risky about, transferring wealth from parents to yourself? How do you protect yourself and your parents in that situation?
Sure. So it's a couple items here, and it's a great topic. Unfortunately, a lot of elderly lose their money to being tricked, whether it's someone who's taking care of them and they sign something over. I'm dealing with a case right now where the grandmother got dementia and someone stepped in and all of a sudden all the money got donated and all the kids and the grandkids were all left out. And there's a huge litigation going on now. So there's a couple different things you can do. Number one it's always best to give while you're alive. And I say that because if you give while you're alive, you know it got where you want it to go. Now, with that being said, I'm not telling an old elderly person to go give everything to their kids, and then they got to ask their kids for an allowance when they want to go to McDonald's. So, you got to look at the totality of the circumstances. But to the extent that you can give while you're alive, that is the best way, because you know with 110% certainty it goes where you want it to go. Again, don't give more than you can. You need money to live on. You don't always want to rely on your kids. You might get in a fight with your kid and then they hold that against you. So you just have to be careful. Unfortunately, it happens. If you're not going to give while you're alive, you got to make sure your estate planning is done. So when I say estate planning, again, I'm talking estate planning, asset protection planning, tax planning, et cetera. If if an older couple did some asset protection planning, for example, and their $1 million brokerage account was in the name of some, protective entity like a limited partnership, well, the help is not even going to know about that company. They're not going to know how to properly sign for that company. So when they try and take money from the person individually, there's not much to take. So you want to have the asset protection planning done, for your elderly parents, but you also want to have the estate planning done, because it's not just for them, it's for you. So think about it. Let's say, the husband passes away, the wife is 90 years old, and she's got one son. Well, if the planning's not done correctly, when that elderly woman turns 93, she passes away, the money goes to the son. Well, what if the son's going through a divorce? Now that other person gets half the money. What if the son is being sued for a car accident? So, as a receiver of an inheritance, you don't know when you're going to receive it. So you need to make sure that your parents' estate planning are done correctly. That way, whenever they do give it to you, it's not going to you. It's going to some sort of protective entity for your benefit. Big, huge difference.
Interesting. And there's been a lot of conversation just personally about, transferring, having property transferred to my name, or taking on some of their wealth, so that it's a different financial picture, looking at assisted living. Do you see clients doing something like that? And is a protected entity important in that scenario?
Absolutely. I see it all the time, and it raises 2 points. Number one, if they're going to give you the assets, again, you don't want them giving them to you, because they give you real estate, you get sued, you lose it. Someone gets injured, you get sued. So have them give it to you correctly in the right protective entity. And you want to do it right from the beginning, because if they just give it to you and then you have to fix it later, well, now there could be double the transfer taxes. So, it's easier to build the house from scratch than to renovate the house. So you don't want to have to do things twice. Number two, and I was talking, I lost my train of thought a little bit. I lost the train of thought of where I was going there. I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
If it comes back to me, I'll tell you.
Okay. Very good. So what are you seeing just from being on the road with Vistage members? Just share with us a little bit about the sentiment. You have the opportunity to be in front of them and share back with the group today. What are the top concerns that you're seeing? Just curious. Sure. From your engagement.
Sure. So first of all, there was times I was speaking to 50 or 100 groups a year. So we've spoken to a lot of groups. I don't travel as much anymore. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old, but the issues don't change. Biggest issue I see with every single business owner, and I've talked to thousands of them, is hiring people. It is tough to find, hire, and keep good people. That is without exception. Another huge thing more related to my talks and my type of planning are 2 issues. Number one, nobody's team is talking. So you got the estate planning attorney over here, you got the tax attorney over here, you got the insurance agent over here, you got the financial advisor over here. Nobody has any clue what's going on, and it's costing the client millions and millions of dollars that they don't even know about. So nobody's financial team is talking. And then lastly, business succession planning. So people think about estate planning, right? Like, hey, what do I do if I die? But what about estate planning for your business? And we do a presentation on business succession planning as well. But what if your partner dies? What if your partner gets sick, can't work? What if your partner doesn't want to work? Well, how do you transfer the business? What happens? Do you have an agreed upon formula with a number? Because a formula can be manipulated. Well, if you have an agreed upon formula with a number, do you have the cash? Most people have a number, but where are you getting the cash from? And so on and so on. So business succession planning, huge topic as I talk these days.
And that's definitely validated by our research. Even at the end of last year, the exit planning, transition, succession planning, really thinking about the future is more and more top of mind.
Yeah, and my goal, when I see someone, when I see a Vistage member, my goal is this, because they're laser focused. The problem is they're only laser focused on the growth. And what I tell them is what they want to do is they want to get protected. They want to do their asset protection planning so they can take those chips off the table, so they can become uncollectible, so they can become judgment proof. God forbid if something happens, whatever it may be, they should know that what they've worked so hard for is safe. And then when they pass away, they should know that the assets are going to go where they want them to go, quickly, privately, less taxes and less lawyer fees, of course, to the extent that it's legal and ethical.
Well, I really appreciate your being here today and sharing your insights, Hillel, and also for giving our attendees the opportunity to opt in to have your book sent to them. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be sending the link to today's recording and the slides 24 hours from now. And I hope you can join us next month for 2 more great webinars. On August 5th, we have Andrew Denny, author of The Circle of Leadership, sharing insights on how to develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for your organization. And as Hillel mentioned, hiring does remain a top challenge for small and mid-sized businesses from his conversations, from our research. So on August 12th, we have invited 3 Vistage members to participate in a roundtable discussion where they will share some of the best practices that have been working for them. You can find more information and register for these webinars at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. And finally, for our members, if you have not had the opportunity to watch the conversation with the legendary CEO of Boeing and Ford, Alan Mulally, that recording is available through October 9th on My Vistage. Thank you everyone for your time. Be safe and be well.